All throughout our years of education, we learn that being smart means getting the right answer. And then we get to a point in life where there isn't a single right answer to get. And so in those moments, they have to shift from being a right answer getter to being what I call a better answer maker.
Welcome back to The Important Part, a podcast about achieving financial independence by making smart investments in yourself and your portfolio. I'm Liz Thomas, your host and head of investment strategy at SoFi. What if the secret to better decision-making isn't eliminating doubt, but embracing it? From a young age, we're taught that we always need the right answer, but one of the world's top business professors is making a radical counter-argument. Doubt is actually your superpower. Bobby Parmar is a professor of business administration at the University of Virginia's Darden School of Business, associate dean for faculty development, and author of the brand new book, Radical Doubt, Turning Uncertainty into Surefire Success, published in August 2025. Bobby's research draws on neuroscience, psychology, and moral philosophy to show why traditional decision-making frameworks fail when we face complex, uncertain situations, and how to turn moments of doubt into opportunities for growth. I am so excited to welcome Professor Bobby Parmar to the show.
This podcast is sponsored by SoFi to help you get your money right. And it's for informational purposes only. Nothing in this program is a recommendation from SoFi. You should not rely on this program for financial, legal, or tax advice or recommendations. The views expressed do not necessarily reflect the institutional views of SoFi or its affiliates.
Welcome to The Important Part, Professor Parmar.
Thanks so much for having me.
Of course. I'm so excited to have you. So we have a lot to talk about here today. But first, just for our listeners to frame this up, this season of the podcast is about high-stakes decision-making. And in investing, we are constantly making high-stakes decisions, whether with our own money or if you're helping somebody else with their money. There are a lot of high-stakes decisions, and there is never complete information. Never, ever. That is the story of the game, right? You never have all of the info. You never know exactly what might happen. You just sort of make your best guess, and you mosaic theory all of it together. So this is an absolutely wonderful marriage of your approach to decision-making and all of the different things that you talk about in your research and to investing. So if you had to describe to somebody, we call it an elevator pitch, right? If you had to describe to somebody what you do, obviously there's the I'm a professor part, but if you had to describe just your field and your visions and what your research encompasses, how would you describe that in a couple sentences?
So by training, I'm a social psychologist and a moral philosopher, and what I care about is helping make business organizations places where human beings thrive. So I bring a human-centered lens to all the work that I do, whether in the context of decision-making, innovation, change, and change management. I want to help make business a deeply human institution.
That was pretty good. It's as if you've done that before.
Been in a couple of elevators, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So one of the things that you're known for along that vein is what's called stakeholder theory. So the idea that companies should serve all of their stakeholders, not just shareholders. And the reason I bring that up is because this is obviously an investing podcast. We talk mostly about shareholders, and we think of things mostly from the perspective of a shareholder. But now blending together what you just described to us as what you do, so social psychology, making organizations places that people can thrive, and what I guess we would look at as capitalism and the profit-making machine for shareholders. How do we either marry those two things together, or how do we solve the conflict that perhaps arises?
Such an important question, Liz. And, a lot of my waking hours are dedicated to trying to understand that intersection. The way that I think about it is that profits are absolutely essential for businesses to succeed and thrive. But just because profits are essential doesn't follow that the purpose of business is to make profits. When we think about shareholders, they're absolutely important to the success of business. But what's really interesting is how shareholder interests and employee interests and managerial interests and community interests can go together. I really believe that business is an amazing tool that human beings have crafted to lift others out of poverty, to do great things together. It's really a cooperation engine. And stakeholder theory helps us see and manage those relationships that help us cooperate to produce all kinds of value. Absolutely financial value, but also social value, relational value, psychological value.
So if we broaden out from shareholders, who are the other stakeholders? What else falls under that bucket?
A lot of it is driven by the specific business model and purpose of a firm that we're paying attention to. But in general, we start with kind of the big five, which are employees, customers, suppliers, shareholders, and communities. And now, if you're in the media, maybe you've got other stakeholders that look more like government or regulators, but it's going to depend on the nature of your business model, whose support you need to achieve your purpose.
Okay, so one of the things that now I'm thinking about is if we are looking at employees as one of the major stakeholders, how do you balance keeping your employees happy and healthy and productive at work with that competition and doing all of the things that you mentioned that businesses are really good at, right? Which is making profits, right? There's a big financial aspect of it. But in order to do all of the other things that are beneficial to society, they have to be profitable. So how do we balance that? I think that's one of the biggest struggles that companies face is that internal culture and avoiding burnout, avoiding too much turnover.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's so easy to be kind of penny wise and pound foolish in this regard, where you burn out employees, you pay a higher cost of turnover, your profitability drops. Like, it's really an important topic that you're raising. And so before I talk about how to marry those two things, I think there's a great example of exactly what you're talking about. So roughly like 15, 20 years ago, there's a great study that compares Costco and Walmart. And things have changed a bit now, but at the time, Walmart was really known for minimizing wages. They weren't paying health care. They were really trying to reduce their labor cost as low as possible. In contrast, if you got a job at Costco, you were getting paid almost $20 an hour. You got paid health care and health insurance. And what was fascinating is if you just look on a per employee basis, of course, Walmart is paying significantly less than Costco. Now, if you factor in the cost of turnover, Walmart is churning employees at the time. And so by the time you search for, hire, train new employees, that turnover cost makes them about the same on a per employee basis as Costco. But then if you take another step back and look at actual sales per square foot, Costco blows Walmart out of the water at the time, in part because happy employees who are taken care of do a better job of taking care of customers who then buy more. Right. And so it's a really important dynamic. How do we engage our employees so that they can create the value for our customers that they need to create? And the secret sauce here is in motivation. When an organization has a purpose that employees really believe, it's not just a set of words on the wall or stuff that you put on a hat and just hand out, but these are things that they see senior leaders living. They're seeing actual resources behind that purpose. People have a lot of motivation. Employees sign up to work at a specific company because they care about that purpose and mission. And that motivation, unlocking that motivation, is the key to, one, mitigating burnout, but also continuing to be innovative and continuing to be competitive. Because employees also want to excel at something. They want to be really good at something. They want to work for a company that's making a difference in the world. And if you can connect that, right? So the reason purpose is so important, it's because it sits at the intersection of what employees want, what senior leaders want, what communities want, what customers want, and what shareholders want.
Purpose starts to get diluted when a company gets too big, right? There's so many different divisions. Everybody has a different objective, but we'll stay focused on some of this. I think the theme that brings it all together is making the right decisions. And as business leaders, trying to put together all of those opportunities, all of those threats, all of the things that could go wrong, all of the competing interests that exist for a company, which naturally brings up a lot of doubts, naturally brings up a lot of uncertainties, a lot of things about the future that we absolutely cannot know. So let's talk about the theme of your book, Radical Doubt: Turning Uncertainty into Surefire Success. So every investor that's listening to this is like, yes, please tell me how to do that, right? I cannot wait to figure out how to turn all of my self-doubt into surefire success. Tell us about the premise in general and why you thought this book needed to be written.
I've been an educator for 18 years, and in that time frame, I've worked with thousands of MBA students, thousands of executives in companies, and the way that people address doubt is something that I see really separates those that are successful from those that really struggle. All throughout our years of education, we learn that being smart means getting the right answer. There's an adult who gives you a check mark or a gold star, and that's how you know that you're good enough. And then we get to a point in life, whether if it's investing, making difficult decisions in the context of leading an organization, balancing our personal and professional lives, where there isn't a single right answer to get. And a lot of my students and a lot of executives that I work with get stuck in that moment because they're trying to use their old tools, their old way of getting the right answer, getting the gold star for a set of problems that don't have a single right answer. And so in those moments, they have to shift from being a right answer getter to being what I call a better answer maker. And becoming a better answer maker means really learning how to wrestle with and use doubt as rocket fuel rather than a roadblock. And so most of us, because we have this belief that getting the right answer makes us smart, makes us competent and worthwhile, we experience doubt as something that is stressful, as something that can be paralyzing. I think about doubt plus fear is some kind of paralysis. But we can also think about doubt as something that catalyzes learning. One metaphor I like to use with my students is that, look, when we go to the gym, whether you're a runner or a biker or lifting weights, there comes a moment in your workout where you start to feel the burn, right? You're doing rep 1, rep 2, you're not getting very much, like that's warm up. But by rep 8, all of a sudden you're feeling the burn. We don't just drop the weights there and say, you know what, I'm not a good weightlifter. I should never do this again. Let me go find some other exercise where I'm never going to feel the burn. That's the part where you're actually getting stronger. That's the part where you're getting more capable. And if we learn to see doubt as that this is the moment where I'm about to learn something new, or I'm about to increase my capacity and capability, then we don't fear and flee those opportunities to continue to learn. It's really easy to say all this, right? Like learn, if we think about doubt plus motivation equals curiosity, that's an easy, nice slogan. But in the moment, when you're feeling stressed, when there's a lot of money on the line, when your personal reputation is on the line, being curious is the hardest thing to do.
So, all right, let's go back to the weightlifting thing, because everybody's going to have that moment, right? If you're new to weightlifting, especially, you get into that feeling of like, oh my gosh, this hurts, right?
It's uncomfortable.
But there's a difference between, there's a difference between it's uncomfortable and I'm going to gain something out of it, or this is not a good pain, something's tearing.
Yeah.
I should stop and see a doctor. How do you decide, let's say you've made a choice, you've chosen a path, whatever that may be, you know it's uncertain, you start to get down that path and it gets difficult, or perhaps there are a few curveballs that got thrown your way, right? And in my case, I'm constantly looking at the data that's coming in. I've got maybe a position on a certain topic. I'm looking at the data that's coming in, and pretty often when the data comes in and there's enough that proves that my previous position needs to shift, I have to change because no longer does that make sense. And that happens a lot in investing. But the most difficult thing to do is to identify when it's okay to make that pivot and when you should stick to your guns. So how much doubt is okay? Yeah. And you know, if you've got some kind of prescription, like out of 10, 7 out of 10 is okay. That'd be great, because if it's measurable, it's even easier.
Yeah, it's hard to put a number on it, but you're exactly right.
Because at some point, sometimes you do have to change direction, not necessarily quit, but you have to change direction. So how do you know when that is?
So I think you've given such a wonderful example, right? Because the world is constantly dynamic, particularly when you're investing. There's new information coming at you. Things are changing that you never anticipated. The problem that many people find themselves in is they're pivoting, but they're pivoting in a way that's reactive. They haven't thought ahead to under what conditions would I pivot? So wise investors, wise decision makers say, look, I'm taking this risk. I'm making this investment, or I'm going to invest in this new product or service. And what can I afford to lose? What will I look for to know that it's time for me to pivot my course of action or fall back to a different scenario? And they've thought about that ahead of time. So then when they're actually having made that investment, they're looking for those signs and signals and pivoting intentionally rather than pivoting based on their fear because they haven't thought about this before. All they thought about was, man, I'm going to make this investment and this stock is going to rise. And guess what? It doesn't rise. And now I'm freaking out. Now I'm saying, I didn't expect this. And so I'm back on my heels and I'm making moves that are not well thought out versus a decision maker or an investor who said, look, I'm taking a risk here. I don't know what's going to happen. I'm fairly confident the stock is going to go up. But if it drops, I'm going to give myself some margin. So if it drops by 15%, now I'm going to 15% over a couple of days. Now I'm going to withdraw this investment and redeploy that capital elsewhere, right? So that's a very different type of decision making, one that takes uncertainty as a fundamental and says, how do I operate in a world that has uncertainty? That means I've got to be flexible. I've got to be adaptive. I've got to think through scenarios. The first model is one that kind of wishes uncertainty away because we feel like we have the right answer, because we're like, damn it, I'm a good investor. I know that this stock is going to go up. We don't contingency plan. We don't have a plan B or a plan C. And then we're stuck. And now we're making decisions in ways that open up that loop of making worse and worse decisions.
So would it be safe to say that if you are about to make a choice and you feel very certain about this choice, that should actually be a red flag?
I would say that yes, and most times it's a red flag, particularly if that choice is something that you're pretty new to. Intuition is a really good guide for choices when we've made that decision lots of times, right? Like if you go to the store and you're like, I want to buy a candy bar and I really love this kind of candy bar, using your intuition is going to be a good guide. You're not going to be disappointed by picking that same candy bar again. But when we're doing novel things, when I haven't done this before, I haven't launched a product like this, or I haven't started a company like this, or I haven't invested in this particular industry before, our intuition can lead us astray. And so it's equally important to say, okay, to pay attention to my intuition, but also to look for things that might change my mind. One of my favorite studies shows that novice decision makers and expert decision makers both have an intuition about what to do in a difficult situation, but they treat that intuition in very different ways. So when you give a difficult decision to a novice decision maker, like, should you launch this product? Yes, it could make you a decent amount of money, but it has all these risks and you're not sure what to do. They might make a decision, yay or nay, but they treat their intuition as if it's their decision. I'm leaning towards yes. So then they cherry pick all the information that makes their intuition right. Expert decision makers treat their intuition in a different way. They also have an intuition, but they treat their intuition as if it's a hypothesis. They say, I'm leaning towards launching this product. What could teach me that I'm wrong? What could I learn about how to mitigate the risks of launching this product? What could change my mind? And so instead of taking your intuition as the stopping point of saying, now I'm done with my decision, I've made it, expert decision makers take it as a starting point. They take it as a cue to get more curious, to learn, to say, what could change my mind? How could I do this in a way that reduces my risk or mitigates some of the risks that I see here? And I think that's really important in the context of, making these difficult decisions.
And it's interesting that you're comparing novice decision makers to experienced decision makers. I think a similar experience happens, in an industry. I've been in this industry now for, I'm going to age myself here, almost 22 years. And when I talk to younger professionals who are just entering the investment business and anybody who maybe less than 5 years, maybe even less than 10 years, because I did this too. And I remember my bosses trying to lightly coach me in a different direction and then not so lightly coach me in a different direction, because you're young and you're hungry and you want to just be right. So you jump to a conclusion. And I never thought of it as being a novice decision maker, but it's true. You do have an intuition, right? There's a gut instinct. Somebody asks you a question, you've got a gut instinct, and you want to just go with it. So you get sort of this statement out of younger professionals sometimes that's very declarative, that this will happen. I feel confident that this will happen, or this is the right choice. And you're right, there isn't a lot of flexibility in that response. And there isn't enough curiosity in that response. So it's funny how it almost works in reverse to what you would intuitively think it would. As you gain more experience, you ask more questions and you almost doubt more.
Yeah, but you're not paralyzed by that doubt,
Right.
right? You come to see it as this is me figuring out what to do in a difficult situation. There's this important distinction in psychology. When people face a stressful situation, you can be problem focused or you can be self-focused. And when we're under high periods of stress, we become really self-focused. It's part of the reason we double down and we make these really big declarative statements is I want to prove myself. I want my boss to know that I'm good at my job, right? That I deserve to be here. That's a normal human impulse. But we're really focused on making sure that we belong to a community, to an environment, that our status doesn't drop, that we feel proud of ourselves, versus once you have some more security, you're much more willing to be problem focused, saying, yeah, I'm not so confident in this. I could change my mind. Or here's the data that I'm going to pay attention to in order to change my mind. You can focus outward rather than trying to protect yourself.
You've worked with Navy SEALs, which I think is, if there's anything that's more high pressure decision making, I'm not aware of it. But and by no means am I comparing the decisions that Navy SEALs have to make to us investors on a daily basis. But sometimes you're under pressure. You have to make a choice in a very short period of time.
Yeah.
And there's a deadline or whatever the case may be. For whatever reason, the decision needs to happen now. And you don't have time to research it. You don't have time to kick your feet up and say, well, what if this and what if that? And let's look into all the different possibilities. So there are circumstances where you have to trust your gut. You don't have time to gather any more information. Or maybe you've gathered as much as you can and it's go time. How would you advise people to pay attention to their intuition in those circumstances?
So as you're exactly right? There comes a time where you've collected as much data as you can, or there isn't time and you've got to make a decision. And in those moments, again, it's not... The tricky place people find themselves into is they get trapped into the go, no go, yes or no, move forward, step back. And if you're able to see more options by saying, okay, I'm going to move forward, but then under these conditions, this is where I'm going to move back. This is my, safety net. This is a sandbox where I'll try this. Then you're limiting the risk. So it's really important. One of my colleagues has this principle that she calls affordable loss, right? And so if we're in those high stakes moments, if we're making giant bets, there's not a lot we can do if we're going to lose that bet. But in those high stakes moments, we can titrate the amount that we're risking to make sure that we have enough in our reserves to make another bet the next day. And so I think wise decision makers don't put all their eggs in one basket. They don't get themselves backed into a corner. So they're doing a lot of work ahead of time, particularly the Navy SEALs. If you look at those folks on aircraft carriers, working in nuclear power plants, yes, though there are moments that are, make or break. We've got to make a decision. But then what happens afterwards is that there are groups of people who come together, who study what happened, what could have been done differently, and then people get trained so that judgment becomes habit. Right. And that's one of the interesting things about the Navy SEALs is that there's a lot of wisdom through analysis that they just drill over and over and over again. So wise decisions become habit. And so then when they're in those high stress moments, they've made good habits that allow them to at least avoid the really costly mistakes.
Is there brain chemistry behind that? Because I imagine in the beginning of that, when you're training yourself to make these good judgments, better judgments, and then trust your better judgments. In the beginning of that, there's some brain chemistry. And then do you, over time, learn how to not let that happen?
Yeah. So I think you're onto something really important here. And in the book, I talk about these 3 interconnected circuits in the brain that regulate our behavior and help create our experience of certainty and doubt. And so you hit on 2 of them, right? So we have what I call our protect system and our pursue system. I'm trying to give more accessible words to the complex, kind of neurophysiology here. So our pursue system is what people have called our reward system or our mesolimbic pathway. And we see something out there or in the future that is rewarding. We want to go get that thing. And so dopamine levels rise, we anticipate some reward, and we, go out and go after that thing. But as our pursue system is active, it focuses our attention on those rewards, and other things in the environment become blurred. And so we have a fair sense of certainty. This is going to work out. If I make this investment, I'm going to be rich. This product or this new company I'm starting, it's going to work, because we're so focused on the benefits that we'll receive. The opposite is also true. We can be focused on the risks or the threats, whether physical or even social. My colleagues won't think as highly of me, or I'll be ostracized from this group, or I'll get fired. And when we're focused on those threats, our protect system is active, right? And so this is where the amygdala and the limbic system kick in. And this is our fight, flight, freeze response when we become hijacked and we're trying to protect ourselves from these threats that we see. And so our pursue system and our protect system regulate our approach and avoidant behavior. And these are really important skills for us to survive. But they work on clear signals when there's a clear prize or there's some clear peril. But often in life, we don't have these clear signals. We have conflicting signals. We're not sure how to interpret this specific signal. We see this investment that has a potential for reward, but has risks. Sometimes we see two investments that are both potentially lucrative, and we don't know which one to make if we don't have the resources to do both at the same time. Or two hard things that we want to avoid, or two bad things we want to avoid, like being stuck between a rock and a hard place. And in those moments where there are these conflicting interpretations, that's when the third circuit becomes much more active. This is our pause and piece together system. This system says, wait, there's no clear interpretation of this current situation. Let me look around. Let me learn. Let me collect some more data to figure out if I should approach, if I should avoid, or something in between. And so we can start to build the skill where over time, we're not hijacked by our protect system or our pursue system, where we're using it flexibly with our pause and piece together system so that we're approaching wisely or avoiding cautiously so that we're not leaving value on the table or we're not running at something only to be blindsided by things that we could have seen but didn't.
Mm-hmm. I think maybe the most important thing to try to figure out then in all of that, especially as an investor, let's say you're going to buy a security or you're going to buy whatever it is, whatever your neighbor made, $20,000 on that you're now hungry to make your $20,000 on. And how to identify as an investor, am I being motivated by that, what did you call it, pursuit? By the pursuit
yeah. Mm-hmm.
mechanism right now? Because all I'm picturing is how much of a hero I'm going to be when this stock goes up by 50% in the next 6 months, right? Or whatever that probably fantastical goal is in your head. How do you identify, though, in those moments, I am being driven by pursuit. I am being driven by fear. I am actually making a logical decision. I've taken both of these into account and now I've stepped back. Does it require you to take a beat?
Yeah, and the duration of the beat could vary depending on, the decision and how practiced you are, how much experience you have. But I think you've hit the nail on the head, right? It's just, particularly when we're doing new things or high risk things, it's really beneficial to say, what are the reasons why I'm so excited about this? What are the things that excite me about this? What are the things that I should look out for and be aware of? What are the potential pitfalls? It's very simple. It's just looking at both pros and cons. And the opposite is also true. Sometimes you have folks who are like, I could never be an investor. I'm so scared I'm going to lose all my money. But then, well, what's the upside here? Are there some positive surprises that we might be missing out on? And so paying attention to both the pros and the cons, and then being as clear-eyed as possible about what am I going to do about these cons? If there's a non-zero chance that I could lose my money, would I be okay with that? Maybe I shouldn't invest all my money. Maybe I should pilot this investment and see what happens. Why am I doing this? Am I doing this just because my neighbor got $20,000? Who else made investments like this, right? And so, as you know, because you're a great investor, there's so much due diligence that goes into these investments, and you can gain some confidence by the quality of that due diligence.
Yeah, and I mean, even just to go back to that, intuition should be treated as a hypothesis. And maybe that goes for every decision maker, right? You have that moment. And oftentimes we too, as investors or just as humans, it's difficult to distinguish between intuition and anxiety. Sometimes you have what you think is intuition about something, but if it induces fear, is that really just an anxiety that you're having or giving up because you've had a bad experience? So there are costs in that too. Maybe you've gone through a decision-making process, it didn't turn out well. Now you're doubting yourself so much. So help those of us, which I think is probably all of us, I'm definitely going to put myself in this category, who have made a decision, it didn't go the way we thought, and now we're just afraid to even broach that subject again.
Such a great question. I like to think about intuition as our memory of the past and our motivation in the present shaping our imagination of the future. So if we invested in a ticker and it didn't work out, that's our memory of the past saying, you know what, if I do it again this time, it's not going to work out. Or our motivation in the present, I don't want to lose this money, or I don't want to look foolish in front of my colleagues. We imagine a future where, of course, this isn't going to work out. And so if we want to make wiser decisions, we've really got to interrogate our memory of the past. How similar is this situation to what I experienced during the financial crisis, or during what I experienced in my last investment, right? The brain works in pattern recognition. So we see the current moment as similar to something we've seen in the past. It's really important to ask that second question, which is, how is the current moment different than the past? Because there might be things that are, whether it's the size of the investment, what's happened to the company, leadership, the nature of the investment, all of those things can shift your odds in lots of different ways. But because we want to protect ourselves, what happens is we think about this investment as this big thing, like, oh, I'm never going to get this investment right, versus breaking it down to what part of this investment, what assumptions was I making last time that may or may not be relevant this time. There's a lot of research that shows that negative information where, in the past where we failed, where something didn't work out, where we felt bad, is so much stickier than positive information. And so, and there are good reasons for that, because we want to learn from our mistakes. We want to avoid making the same mistake again. But to your point, sometimes those lessons are framed at too broad a level. I'm never going to be a good investor, versus I've got to learn how to deal with these kinds of assumptions or these kinds of market shifts, right? That's a much more nuanced, fine-grained thing. And when you can take those big doubts and focus them and shrink them by naming it and saying, this is what I don't understand, or these are the assumptions where I have questions, now you can take steps. You're much more likely to be able to take steps that are productive and possible.
Can you just come hold my hand through all of my investing decisions?
It's like group therapy.
From here on out.
Totally.
Yeah, I think there's probably a lot of people listening to this who would prefer that. They could just email you, send you a quick Slack message like, hey, I think I'm going to buy this, but here's how I'm feeling in this moment.
I think you raise a really important point, right? When human beings are a deeply social species. And what that means is that when we experience doubt, one of our most powerful coping mechanisms is to turn towards someone else, to say, hey, wait, are you seeing this thing that I'm seeing? Can you double check the way that I'm feeling about this? Or are you seeing something different? But often, because we have this sense that we want to get the right answer, we want to make the right investment, we actually have the opposite impulse, which is to turn inward and to be alone. And that becomes really dangerous, because you sit and stew on your own thoughts and you start to have this negative spiral and catastrophize, when having a conversation with a trusted advisor, friend, mentor, a colleague who might see things differently than you can help you find a little bit of clarity in the fog.
Mm-hmm. Yep. There is always more clarity when you get a little bit of feedback, and when you purposely seek out a conflicting opinion. You don't have to end up agreeing with it, but in investing in particular, maybe you've got a thesis about something. Always try to make the counter argument, because every once in a while you start to make the counter argument and you're like, oh gosh, my counter argument's pretty good. Now I got to rethink this. But, you always have to seek that out, make it a well-rounded choice. Okay, well, thank you for the regular part of the program. We've got a couple real quick questions, kind of lightning round questions.
Oh, wow.
So,
okay.
In the theme of high-stakes decisions,
yeah.
What's the best decision you've ever made in your career?
Ooh, can I say a personal decision?
Sure.
Yeah, marrying my wife. She's amazing. Genius, has strengths that I don't have. We're a great team, and is unafraid to tell me about how I can be better and the things that that I can learn.
Unfiltered feedback.
Yes, she's amazing in every way.
That's a great answer. And lastly, what's one practice that you wish everybody would adopt but nobody does?
Comparing options. I think it's like repeatedly proven in the research that we make better choices when, instead of having a single option, we compare multiple options. Like, even if it's two things, investment A, investment B, why is investment B better than A? The nature of our thinking is significantly better when we're comparing and contrasting options than if we have one option we're trying to make the right one.
I like that. I like that a lot. Well, Bobby Parmar, thank you very much for coming on the podcast and giving us a schooling on how to make better decisions as investors, how to not get in our own way, how to hopefully avoid the wrong risks and go after the right ones.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me on.
So many things to take away from that episode. I think the three most important parts, first of which, treat your intuition as hypothesis, not truth. That might be far and away the biggest takeaway, at least for me. He talked a lot about novice decision makers versus experienced decision makers, and how more experienced decision makers are more comfortable with the uncertainty and more comfortable with just doubting basically the certainty of a particular decision. So when you have what you think is a gut instinct or an intuition, treat it as a hypothesis and sort of work around it, not as a specific takeaway of truth. Second big important thing that I think we all can learn from, stop looking for the right answer and instead look for the better answer. So traditionally, we are trying to solve for one particular solution, one particular goal that we're after. And in reality, that's not how it usually works. We should be trying to make a better solution, not necessarily just the one right solution, because generally speaking, the first one may not be the correct one. And then lastly, which kind of applies to both of those, build optionality into your plan, build flexibility into your plan, whether that's with an investment, a business decision, a life decision. Understand that there's probably going to be a few things along the way that are going to come in and knock you off your path, curveballs that you have to adapt for. Build that flexibility in and allow yourself the buffer of risk that is inevitable. Thank you so much for listening to that. I hope that people listen to that one a few times. I think there was a lot to be learned, particularly for investing. We look forward to bringing you the next episode very soon. For more from me, read my weekly column in SoFi's newsletter, On the Money, and on the SoFi website, or follow me on X at Liz Thomas Strap. Follow The Important Part wherever you get your podcasts. The Important Part is produced by SoFi in partnership with Sony Podcasts.
Investments are not FDIC insured, are not bank guaranteed, and may lose value. Elizabeth Thomas is a registered representative of SoFi Securities, LLC, and an investment advisor representative of SoFi Wealth, LLC. SoFi Invest is a trade name used by SoFi Wealth, LLC, and SoFi Securities, LLC, offering investment products and services. Robo-investing and advisory services are provided by SoFi Wealth, LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor. Brokerage and self-directed investing products offered through SoFi Securities, LLC, member FINRA SIPC. For disclosures on SoFi Invest platforms, visit sofi.com/legal. For a full listing of the fees associated with SoFi Invest, please view our fee schedule.